What's going on, Color Commentary family? Welcome to Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I'm your host, Marcus Lloyd, and with me, as always, in the studios, Mr. Antoine Malone. What's up, man?
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show, the last show
of our series.
Of this series.
And we are not in this studio alone. I know I say, hey, and with me, as always, in the studio is Mr. Antoine Malone, right? But we got other folks in the studio.
We got other people, so we got to do it.
So it's going to be fun. So if you've been listening to the series, you've been introduced to several people that have been in studio regularly. That's your line there, the regular.
Regular.
It's
regularly.
Oh, my bad. I got it. I'm trying to get it.
We will get you there.
I'll get there eventually. We'll see.
One day.
We are obviously, Pepper's in the house, right? Is here. She's doing it. But next to Pepper, you'll see Chino is as well. So we have got the Peppercino here in the studio, right? It's going to be
saucy.
I have no idea what's going to happen today, and of course,
I can tell you're a little nervous.
I am
actually,
super nervous.
Everybody,
it's going to be wild.
Samuel, hold on to your butts. Can I say hold on to your butts?
You just said it, so
Samuel Jackson.
It's already done.
Okay,
That's
did it.
already done. And of course, our engineer in the lair, the Megamind lair, Schmevin, holding down as well.
What's up? Glad to be here in the middle of peppuccino season.
That's right. It's good. It's getting close to the peppuccino season. You know what I mean? Fall sounds like a peppuccino kind of time that you'd have one, or maybe Christmas because it's got pepper in there, like peppermint.
I was going to talk about,
but you're not peppermint. You are pepper.
Yeah. I don't like.
Yes.
Mint.
No.
What? You don't like?
You don't like it?
No.
You eat candy canes all the time.
But that's different than like chocolate, like mint chocolate chip. No, thank you.
Oh,
like
so
if it's peppermint by itself, that's fine.
Okay.
Or like in a mojito, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, but
you got very specific. So literally, there's one way that you don't like mint.
Well,
so every other way, we're gonna do mint. But the line is
fine.
I don't like mint.
Okay, that's fine.
So you don't like
no, she's established. She likes all the
chocolate.
mints.
Yeah, mint. Okay.
No, she doesn't. No, if it's chocolate and mint, she's not. But anything else,
like the ice cream, like
so
the green.
A frappuccino doesn't have to be chocolate.
Correct.
No.
And it doesn't have to have mint in either as well.
Sure.
Which I don't think it has to.
Pressure.
No,
but peppercino.
But a peppercino.
All right.
That's
Too much conversation on mint and peppers and chinos.
There's nothing wrong with it.
I'm not even wearing
this
chinos.
Is why
I'm
he
wearing
was
jeans.
Okay.
It's already off the rails, and it's 3 minutes into the deal. Welcome again, Colored Commentary. We're so glad you guys are here in the midst of this wonderful series that we've been doing, Christianity in the Public Square. We've gone through lots of different things. And so we're in our last episode, and so we're just going to have some fun and talk about where things have been, where it's going, all that good stuff. But before we get into some of that stuff, first, a couple of things.
Okay.
One, I noticed that a couple of you are wearing some T-shirts there. I'm not. I've got
today.
a Justice.
We have traded places today because
that's right.
I have
not
not
been Dan Aykroyd and you're Eddie Murphy. How's that working in there?
You can be Dan Aykroyd if you
want.
No,
I'm fine. So you got a threaded shirt on. And Chino's got one on as well. So if you want to get one of those, and we definitely have a lot of those merch coming out. You can check it out, wearethreaded.org.
Christmas is
/shop. You're not going to let me finish the deal. wearethreaded.org/shop. Now, go ahead.
Christmas is coming up.
It is.
And so why not get trendy merch?
That's right.
I have the vintage collection series threaded.
Oh yeah,
shirt.
that's right. You have the I am not a threat.
No.
Is that the one you're working?
It's straight up threaded.
Oh, I didn't see
straight
it.
Up threaded.
Okay,
straight up threaded.
Fantastic.
Also, gift cards.
That's right. Pepper, do they?
Yes.
We got some gift cards.
Yeah, you can go and shop gift cards on our website. So if you have somebody they're like, oh, I don't know what they want, send them a gift card. Merry Christmas.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
That's
to
right.
Both threaded and to whoever it is.
That's right.
Look at that. You get the 2 for 1.
I love it. And look, we are a 501c3 ministry threaded, which powers this podcast. So we love when people come alongside and engage with us. In fact, one of the things that we try to help people with is, there's so many things going on in this racial conversation, right? Like, I mean, it's hard. There are, ways in which people feel like they get stuck or they don't know how to begin. So we actually launched a campaign called Just Start, right? This is the opportunity for you as you're looking at everything. It's like, okay, how do I just get started with this color commentary? How do I do it? Well, we have held it up for you, right? Go to wearethreaded.org/juststart. I mean, it's really complicated stuff. Just Start. On that site, you'll have several ways that you can already start your conversation. You can start through education. You can listen to something, watch something, engage with color commentary a little bit more. There's also a pledge. If you want help and accountability as you just start from Threaded to kind of guide you along your way, you can just say, hey, this is a pledge that I'm going to take to say I am in on this work. And then obviously from a financial standpoint, there's a lot of ministries out there. that are doing this work. Actually, that's a lie. Actually, I shouldn't say that. That's not true. There's very few that are doing this work at the level that we're doing this work and others are doing it, and they need your support. So even if it's not threaded, right? Like find these racial unity and justice ministries, the ones that are working specifically with the church, and support them, or they will go away, right? Like we are all sitting around going, gosh, we need to figure out more support that comes in so we can keep doing this work. So come alongside and be a part of that. Just start with just $10 a month. I mean, that's like, you can get a peppuccino at Starbucks for $10 a month. So sacrifice your peppuccino. It's hard to sacrifice a peppuccino.
When they can get a peppuccino.
No, probably not. They're gonna have to pay. They're gonna have to pay a little bit. That'll be fitting. You know what I mean? That ain't 10. You got to go a little bit more to get a peppuccino. That's all right. So anyway, all that exciting. So just start with us there, right? Second thing, Antoine, is it's that time of the show. Oh, excited. I heard some excitement. That's right. It's the time where we say what?
Saith what?
That's right. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We didn't get that, I think, in one of our last shows. And so we're going to, we had a whole show on just say what. The whole show was
a big
say what.
Say what.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to do a say what. Are y'all going to fight about it over there, Peppuccino, or did y'all figure it out? I didn't really talk.
She wrote it
out
for me to say.
Oh, I like it. A little teamwork.
Yes, teamwork.
Teamwork.
We're collaborative. We're a collaborative organization.
That's good. That's a good point. And it's cross-cultural collaboration.
Yes.
Right? That's good. I like it. We're already modeling Threaded's vision. God, could you say kind of? I don't know what that means, but we're just going to keep moving on that. We're going to call it intercultural collaboration. No, intercultural. We're good. We're all working together here, right? So, all right.
Ready?
I think I am.
Is this a prepare your heart one?
It might be.
It might be.
Okay.
I'm still not sure that slavery was a sin.
Once again, we should probably let the people know that that's not Janelle's thought.
Yeah,
that's fair.
You kind of sold that line, and it kind of sounded like you were really on that. So I believed you for just a moment.
Coming to a theater near you.
Well, look, it don't even have to come to a theater near you. My last church, I'm in an elder meeting, and I'm about to leave the elder meeting, and that one of the elders, in sort of like a push against some of the things we were talking about, that's what he said in the meeting. I'm leaving the meeting, and this is the thing that's being said. I'm like, oh my! I get outside. I'm like, did that really happen? In the 2020s,
that would shake me up just a little.
It did. I didn't know what to do, but I knew it was time.
It is a say what, because to the degree that you're not even sure what you're going to say.
What do you say?
You're like, what? Did you just?
It's one of those conversations that you don't have the material for, like ready to go, because you haven't needed it for so long. You've replaced it with material that seems to be more regular and more what people are talking about. And when somebody brings up this sort of argument against slavery, I have to go so deep in my notes to like find all the reasons that it feels like I can't even like conjure it sometimes. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I'm going to
assume that the argument is a sovereignty of God argument.
All right, we'll talk about that. Say more.
Yeah, well, like nothing happens by accident. God is in control at all times. Slavery happened. God was using slavery. I'm assuming that's a version.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess
someone might try to get to there.
So the activity of slavery, I can understand in the terms of a sovereignty conversation, but the idea of slavery being a sin. It's not necessarily where I get that, right? Just because something is happening or going to happen doesn't make it sinless or erase it from its sin.
I'm thinking about a different.
You thinking about a different version?
Different version of this question.
Okay.
I'm thinking about at least slavery wasn't as bad as we think it is because it introduced Christianity to
African Americans.
Yeah, which is another version.
Another version. There's plenty in there for that.
But let's deal with the sin.
Okay, I'm going to deal with the African Americans. I think this,
we gotta get
which
to that
I think actually works in the conversation.
They're kind of together,
right?
Bit.
It's so interesting to me, right? Because so much of there's plenty of things to say, right? But if you were to look at it even just biblically with the people, quote unquote, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if quoting is right for that. But the people of God, just looking at the Old Testament and looking at the activity and the work of slavery for the Israelites, right? And the ways in which this slavery was done, because slavery was a part of the ancient world and part of antiquity, right? and I don't think anybody poo-poos and understands that, but when we say slavery, particularly in the American context, it's so much different than anything that's mentioned in the Bible, right? Particularly in the American context, what you are dealing with is not just the idea that somebody owes you something and therefore they are enslaved to you until they pay off their debt, right? That's or somebody, you do something for somebody and they decide that they're going to be their servant until they feel they've paid you off for what they've done, right? Like when you walk through a lot of times in ancient times, you'll see some of that. Or it's not a kind of slavery that you maybe get into slavery and you can buy your way out of to be now free or some, that kind of thing.
That would be the sort that you see in Rome.
Right, exactly. Or even what you'd see a lot of times in ancient times is people can't be, like, it's not that you're born into it, right? It's not like, okay, your mom's a slave, so that means when you're born, you're just automatically a slave, right? But the antithesis in many ways to all those things is what we see existing in American slavery, right? It was not done, particularly once it got to the early 1800s, where slavery became less of just a positional kind of engagement in society that could be either black, white, or Native American or whatever. In the 1800s, it became specifically attached to the skin color of black people, right? And so with that, the policies that were created in such a way as you actually couldn't even get out of that slavery. Whatever the race of the mother was, this is a funny thing, whatever the race of the mother was, the child now became. So what that meant is if black men and black women were having relations, if they were having relations and had a baby, the baby was a slave. If the white slave master raped the black slave woman and they had a baby, that baby was a slave, right? So it worked really well for white men. But in the midst of our work of slavery, in America, we denied people's rights. We stole them from places. We broke up their families. We forced them into breeding tactics where people were having sex with people who were not their spouses, and we did it all under the guise of the doctrine of discovery, right? The manifest destiny, the idea that there is a group of people that should be able to do whatever they want to further the Christian narrative in any place they go, including stealing people, putting them to slaves, breaking up their family, and forcing them to have sex and babies with others to breed, right? So that's just a start. That any of those things I would attach to a sinful behavior as well. So that's just a start.
Wouldn't some people, like the argument that if I go back and I say that to somebody, like if I try to explain that, inevitably what they come back with is the argument of, well, yeah, but what you're describing doesn't describe every slave's experience. There were some slaves who maybe weren't in such a rough environment, which, like, so I obviously know that's not true, but how do you respond to somebody that tries to defend that there was some value to slavery by saying there were some that were in a better environment?
Yeah, the issue, in my opinion, the issue with slavery is that it robs the humanness of the slave in the context. So it doesn't matter how beautiful, how comfortable.
It's a funny phrase to say.
I know how comfortable the life of the slave is, whether he be the house slave or the field slave, or she. It is the idea that this created thing is not human, because we do all the things that you just said to pets. Yeah. Like we break up families, we breed, we don't think twice about taking a dog from its parent or any other type of pet, because we don't imagine that those things, whether they are domesticated or a field animal that's going to do work like a donkey, we don't imagine that they are being robbed of their rights as a creation from God. And American slavery, it's a sin because it takes the image of God and tries to rob that image of God in a civilized way. It literally disrupts the creative order of God, which is why they needed to find a way to baptize it with these series of really bad doctrines and theologies to try to attach it to God's creation, to make it feel like, well, God meant it to be this way.
Sure. It was the natural order of creation.
Which is what they were attempting to do. But, but the sin is to take the image of God and to treat it less than it is meant to be treated. And whenever that happens, at whatever level, sin has occurred. And that's what at the base level, experience aside, that's what makes, for me, slavery a sin.
Can I go further with that? Just thinking about the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I think about, particularly in the American context, that is one that has been branded as this Christian environment, and so many things have been done with the Christian sort of sign off, if you will, is that taking God's name in vain, right? The idea that slavery and the support for slavery, God's name was put on top of that, which is not how God seeks to engage in relationship with human beings and relationship for human beings to have with each other, right? This goes all the way into our racial reconciliation conversation in the gospel, where we talk about the reconciliation work that Jesus did on the cross was not just a reconciliation of us and God, but it was a reconciliation with our brother as well, right? So we know that brokenness caused us to not be in relationship with our brother. In that particular passage of Ephesians 2, it's this Jews and Gentiles conversation, but it all has to do with this animus and oppression that was at play between Jews and Gentiles all throughout the Old Testament. So they had to get that figured out, right? So ultimately, the reason why they had this wall of hostility is because of things like slavery. And what Jesus came to do was to undo that, right? To create a new order in which people are reconciled to one another and they live in harmony and in a just society. So the fact that Jesus comes and in his work on the cross that he undoes the kinds of relationships between people who were different that could be described in this particular category as slavery that worked out. The fact that he comes to undo that itself shows that it's not a part of the natural order, a part of the way things should be, right? Which I think is which is a very key point, I think, when you're talking about anything, but slavery in particular is when the Garden of Eden was created, if you will, the relationship between humans was one that is diverse because of other things we'll talk about at some point, but it was reconciled. They were together. Now, I know people will argue about who was higher and lower in the midst of that, but they are reconciled. The version of humanity was not one of slavery, but it was one of collaboration around the work. In fact, I think we as a country had an opportunity right after slavery to do something very collaborative that would have changed even the necessity for a show like this or a ministry like Threaded. But we chose, instead of choosing collaboration when we were when people arrived at this land, they chose sin and ones in which they chose like a chattel slavery or oppression to be able to lord over people. So I think there's aspects of that goes in too.
Yeah, for the Bible bros, Theo bros out there, there is the Old Testament scriptures in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and some of the early stuff that seems to speak to a form of slavery in the way that you laid out at the very beginning. It's not this sort of form that dehumanized, but a different. But we also see in the Old Testament, particularly for me, I think about the book of Amos. And in the beginning of the book of Amos, there's this understood thing that God is like going after all the nations around Judah and Israel. And he's like, hey, this nation's been bad. And varying forms of dehumanization, including the selling and the trafficking of people, is the reason God is going to bring judgment to those nations. It's one of the examples of a place where God speaks in the Old Testament specifically against the idea of slavery and the selling of people and the mowing down of people who are seemed to be who have less value than other people who have human rights. And so Amos 1 is a really great spot to kind of notice that if you ever run into it with people who come to you with the Leviticus and the Genesis and the Exodus numbers and around Exodus 20 and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you got to also deal with, because people are like, well, Paul in Philemon, right? Like he sends Onesimus back. But as you unpack that very short book, right, he's not sending him back to be in service, but he's actually calling out the equality of his existence as a member of the body of Christ as he's coming back to you, that he is a brother in the membership, if you will, to come back and vying for him and pleading for, in many ways, his value as an equal member an equal heir in the line of Christ, right? So it's all over now. I do think that I want to say one thing though, because I know people will go exactly what you said. Like, it was a way in which African Americans, if you will, came in contact with Christ, right? I think for me personally, I think that's a sham, right? Like, what African Americans, what my people came in contact with was actually not Christianity. It wasn't Christianity. It was some version. It was somebody who was doing something and they put Christianity on top of it, right? Like, it was Christendom, right? I've said that before on the show. Like, it was a Christendom mentality and a Christendom practice, but it wasn't Christianity, because Christianity already existed in where Black people existed, right? Christianity didn't come into birth once Constantine made Christianity part of the public square and part of the society, but it came into birth when Jesus died on the cross, right? And when Acts started at Pentecost, these languages were given to this Jewish ethnicity, but in Jews who came from all the cultures, right? So it was already going out to the different cultures where there would be people who are different types. And then Acts 8, where the Ethiopian eunuch, it didn't symbolize an actual nation. Where he came from was Nubia, and this is where people who had black skin were. And so when they saw these people, they called them Ethiopians, which meant and translates into black skinned one, black faced one, right? So this is black people, and so this Ethiopian eunuch takes the gospel into Africa, there, into sub-Saharan Africa, where black people are, where most of the slaves were actually taken from. And so that's just one sort of entry point. That's a biblical entry point where the Christianity was always a multicultural, and it was already in existence moving into Africa. Now, albeit, as it moved into Africa, it became less of a pervasive force. It was in smaller chunks. As it moved east and south, it moved into smaller chunks. And when the colonialists showed up in Africa, they brought this semblance of what they had heard and what these Africans had been hearing in certain places. But it was only when the Africans were able to take over the message of Christ for themselves from the colonists that we saw the gospel and the believership grow exponentially in Africa. The growth we have in Africa now is because it was finally taken over by the locals in their context to do that. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that. And last thing on this too is it should be very interesting to note that if African Americans if they became connected to Christianity because of this, it wasn't really any help from white people, right? Because they gave them a Bible that was missing 60% of the Bible because it had so much to do with justice, right? And so what they captured,
and prohibited them from learning to read,
and prohibited them learning to read. So what introduced, if I can say, the African Americans, those who were brought over here, my ancestors in slavery, what introduced them to Christ was the Bible and the Holy Spirit itself. Because the slaveholders and the Christians, primarily, not everybody, they were almost ridiculed, and it was against the law for a while to even evangelize your slaves, because they thought if they become Christians that they'll think themselves to be free, and then they won't be slaves anymore. Well, human, right?
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's free, but they would desire freedom.
So there's a Holy Spirit moment. Yeah. There's a Holy Spirit movement that actually goes to all cultures. And that's how black people really came in contact. Colonialism.
This last thing, and we can move on. But also, the ends doesn't justify the means anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Amen.
If we apply that thinking, then we would exonerate the crucifiers of Christ, because he was crucified to save the world. You say, well, had that not happened, then where would we be? You're like, no, you still have a problem. Those persons who whipped and lied and messed up the courts and delivered Christ up, they were still in their sin. And they don't get exonerated because God redeems what he redeems. And so that ends justifies the means thing is a very American capitalist way of thinking.
You can't devalue another image bearer of God in hopes of teaching them about God. Like that's never going to be God's model of how to get his grace to them. by letting somebody devalue an image bearer.
Indeed.
That sounds like a transition to Christianity in the public square.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
No, it's a perfect transition. I don't know, Chino, Pepper, anything to throw in there that we missed?
Mm-mm.
Not a thing?
Mm-mm.
Oh, wow. We must have done all right.
Man,
Usually there's a whole litany of things that comes in the midst of meetings. So, hallelujah. This is great.
maybe we'll get it after.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see what they say. Not on microphone, Marcus, is what they just said. Hey, that's been another segment of Say What? And excited. I'm glad. It was a longer section. I missed it. From the last time. So.
That's right. We doubled up.
I'm a little bit triggered.
I'm just, right now. Which part? What's triggered?
All of it. The whole conversation.
Did you walk in triggered? Were you triggered before we turned the mics on?
No, I was not. I was triggered. Well, maybe, but not in this. Not for this conversation. For sure. All right, color commentary. I just need to let you in on something that you need to know about. All right, and it is BeauxMD, right? Medical aesthetics in downtown McKinney. Fine folks, highly trained in the art of facial restoration and preservation. And it's led by my good friend, Dr. Jeffrey Barstad, right? And no, this isn't plastic surgery. Don't get it wrong, right? This incredibly kind and gentle provider team offers same-day, low downtime, minimally invasive treatments designed to restore, preserve, and beautify what God has already given you, right? Now, it can be from erasing fine lines to treating aggressive signs of aging, from simple skin care to comprehensive treatment plans. I'm telling you, Dr. B, my buddy, and his expert team will guide you through the entire process. So you need to go and check them out for sure, right? This space itself is designed and effective with its creative beauty, so you got to check it out. So just stop by, check out BeauxMD, right? Say hello and tell them when you're booking your first treatment that Colored Commentary sent you, and you'll get a 15% discount on your first treatment. That's right, 15% discount. You gotta go and check this out, right? Take care of yourself and all the beautiful canvas that God has given you, and check them out at BeauxMD.com. That is BeauxMD.com. Check them out, BeauxMD. Okay, so we have been in the midst of this Christianity in the public square, which has been a multi-episode series. This is kind of something new that we've done for Colored Commentary, where we've really wanted to create a series that can be utilized even beyond the election season that we currently, as we're filming this, are in. But we knew, or we hoped, that as people were moving through this particular election season, that some of the things that we're talking about would be helpful in a very general way, but also not just in election season, but just throughout, right? Because we know that Christianity in the public square is not something, Christians engaged in the public square is not just something for a presidential election season. It is an everyday, all the time engagement, which is what we hope you saw with many of the folks who came through, where we talked about what it looked like to be engaged in strategies of community engagement, where we talked about what a race taxonomy looks like as we're having that conversation, where we talked about advocacy and conversations and nationalism and things of that nature, that these are things that are going to really be with us in this conversation as Christians going forward. Are there other things? Absolutely. There's absolutely other things in the Christian square that we can talk about, but this is what we have for this particular series, and we hope that it's been helpful for you. I'm curious because we've had everybody in the room at some point in here talking about this here for the conversations. I know everybody listens to the conversations who's in this room and has to do things with the conversation as well. So I just want to have a chat today, just to kind of have the people in the room, almost like you're sitting around in a group setting where we're talking about the series ourselves, and kind of let the audience know kind of what are some of the things that we took away from this series that we're going to take with us, and maybe if there's something that we wish would have come out of the series as well. You know what I'm saying? So,
by the way, you can participate in this.
Ooh, tell us
audience. How. Yeah, like just jump in the comment section, leave us some of the things that you got. Maybe a top 3 things. You could do a top 1.
Yes, so pause.
But if you want to, the A+, there's some A+ people out there.
Yes, they will do exactly what you tell them to do.
Let's get 3.
Okay, we're going for 3. So pause the video right now and go ahead and put your 3 things. And here's the deal. If this is your first video, pause it. go back and watch.
We'll see you in 6
We'll
hours.
see you. Yeah, go watch all of them.
All right,
Come back,
longer
put
than
it here.
6 hours, yeah.
And in each one of those, you can actually, if you want to do your work even better, in each one of those, you can put your top 3 from that episode.
There
And
you
then come
go.
back at the end and then have a whole little paragraph. It'll be like
Aggregate it all.
a curriculum. You know
It'll
what I
be
mean?
like
Just
that.
come back and this will be your final. Your final will be here. That's it. So, all right, Antoine.
No, you don't want to start with me.
Oh, really? Like that's how this is going to work? Like you don't want
Okay,
to start?
well,
we're gonna be able to talk more about it.
I'll
But
give you one of them. Okay, so the first one is that I was thinking through. I thought the Daryl Box episode, and the paradigm. That's the episode 2. That's the paradigm where he's sharing a way to think about where people are in the conversation and how to identify where they are and therefore have a kind of graceful conversation based on that knowledge. I think is a really helpful way to navigate this very, polarized conversation, right? It's really easy for us, especially in the Christian space, to just expect everybody to have the same conviction that we have and be at the same conviction level and have the same urgency around that conviction. And the truth is people are in different places along the journey.
Yep.
And we've got to learn as a Christian body, not just with politics, but in so many spaces, to hold space for people who are on the journey from one idea to the next. And he gave us a way to do that. I think is really helpful.
Yeah, it was helpful too, because when we recorded that episode, we had no idea that this season ultimately that we would be in our own political season would have a racial component to it. And so I think there were some times where people maybe watch that and they're like, okay, what does race have to do with this, Christianity Public Square? Well, A, we're colored commentary. Like we got to have a colorful, taxonomy that we're going to put in there. But B, I know as we continue to deal with politics in the midst of the diversification of America, Christians, as they come into that, they're going to see that there's this idea around this concept around identity politics that plays out in some of that, and some of that's going to be racial, and so to be able to have that taxonomy is helpful. I've actually
at the time it was Biden and Trump still, so it, to your point, like it was less. It felt like maybe race won't play as big a role in this one, and then of course,
and then it did. And then we see it at lower levels too, not just at the presidential, but mayoral, gubernatorial. Yeah, so all of that stuff is played out, and I think it was a helpful taxonomy for me. I've used it. I've used parts of it. Yeah. Like when I preach places, I always kind of adjusted it, but I talk about people as excited, open, suspicious, and skeptical. Right. So the excited, if I'm talking about whatever it is, whether it be a political issue or whatnot, there's people who are going to be like, I'm waiting for this, been waiting for it. There's people who, Daryl would articulate as the twos who are kind of like, yeah, I'm interested, whatever. And then you've got people who he would articulate as the ones. These are the suspicious people. They don't actually want to hear what you're doing. And then in the conversation, the fours, which are the skeptical, they're like, yeah. So that positions, many times I'm positioning myself as a 3 as I go into places and engage it. So that's good. Anybody else resonate with some of that stuff with the racial place? I
thought that the thing that I appreciated was not just that it's a taxonomy that's not just valuable for the race conversation. I think it's for basically all of social justice. Just and when you engage with other people, sometimes you get so frustrated because you're like, why can't I seem to connect with you? But when you realize that you're 2 or 3 spaces away from each other, that it's going to be really hard for us to get on the same page. I got to find a bridge between us to help us to have a healthy conversation. I thought that was beneficial for me.
That's good. That's good. Ladies, I see you shaking your head over there.
I think it was a good setup for the whole series, just to have that rubric, if you will, and keep in mind as you go, not just for this conversation, but for all conversations about all things, whether theology, doctrine, whatever. It was just super helpful to have.
Good.
Keep in mind.
Fantastic. All right, who's up next then? Chino, you look like you've just been ready to blow up over there. Just give us one. Just give us one. I know you got like a list of 8. But what's your one?
She has all these notes over here.
I know, I can see it. She's got it all written out exactly the way she wants to say it. It's going to be great. So give it to us.
Okay. I think, if we're going to go in order, episode 3 was Alexia.
Yeah, we don't have to go in order, just generally.
But I have one.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So go for it.
Okay. It was the thing that she said at the very end, where is Jesus going? Like, we need to ask ourselves where Jesus is going and just thinking about that, of where was Jesus spending his time? Who was he spending his time with? And how does that translate to, like, who would the people that Jesus was spending his time with represent today? And am I willing to go into those places?
Did you answer that question for yourself? Are you willing to go into those places?
I want to be.
I'm just curious. She asked the question. I just wanted to know if you had an answer for it. Yeah, following Jesus as he maneuvers through his own space, and how do we engage that? Yeah, I love that.
And that's the challenge as a believer.
Yeah.
Again, these things are, it turns out that trying to live like Jesus
It's not easy.
is not easy, and it just affects every part of our life.
Yeah.
And we happen to be talking about the political space right now, but that statement, following Jesus, literally as a disciple, you're following Christ, and he's walking down the Psalms 23 is really helpful for me in this. Like, there's green pastures and there's valleys of the shadow of death. And when I read Psalms 23, the shepherd in that context is kind of leading us down both of these spaces.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes we like the green pasture part, but the valley of the shadow of death is a different part that is hard to go with. And he says, my rod and my staff will be with you. Like, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to give you guidance, right? So you're not doing that by yourself, but it still can feel very scary. And in this conversation, it feels like there's a lot to lose when you follow Jesus. And therefore, it creates a kind of trepidation.
I wonder if that's because we talked about this in some hesitation episode as well with Collin. It's the piece that I think the Constantine change undid for us, right? I think everyone before Christianity became like the state religion of Rome, they understood what you're talking about. They expected it. Whenever they decided to follow Jesus, they knew suffering would come. It was an expectation. But once we were kind of put in the throne room of power, and we became the home team in all the places, we lost that. And so now here we are, generations later, as Christians living in another kind of empire, and we expect to live in a kind of power structure where we don't suffer. The decisions we make that follow Jesus shouldn't have us suffer. We shouldn't be difficult.
Yeah, we want it to be socially norm or socially accepted.
Right.
Yeah, and therefore, we expect to minimize social cost.
Yes.
And there is always a social cost when you're living in an extra kingdom or an outside of the kingdom of heaven kingdom, which is where we are. So, yes.
What was it? Was it Collin, or I can't remember if it was Collin or if it was Stephen, that we were talking about not chasing after Jesus, but pursuing the marginalized and finding Jesus already there. That was the other thing that that in the midst of this, it hit me of like again, we think that by having power that we're going to take Jesus places, but it's like I'm just keep finding myself more and more convicted that we've got to pursue fighting for the marginalized and standing up for what they need, because Jesus is out there already, like, fighting for them as well. That's what you see throughout Scripture. He was fighting for the marginalized repeatedly, and that was something that really resonated for me.
Yeah, he exists in the margins. That's where he incarnates, and that's where he identifies. Matthew 25, and even in his proclamation when he first came out in Luke 4. I mean, I keep thinking, like, we didn't see Jesus for 30 years. What was he doing for 30 years? He was living in a marginalized area that nobody thought anything good could come out of. And so it only makes sense if you live with people who are poor, you live with people who are oppressed, live with people who are captives, that when you come out and you have a message to send, that you would bring good news. You're bringing good news to the people that need it, the poor. Liberty, set to liberty those who are captive, right? This is what his message. And so he exists there. And so to truly find him, and to be counted as his, in many ways, the way Matthew 25 is talking about, the reason that there's this almost like this salvific thing that seems to be associated with Matthew 25 is ultimately what he's saying is, when you do the things for the least of these, you have actually come in contact with me. It is clear that you know who I am. If you don't engage with these people, it's not clear that you know who I am, because you actually never engaged with me, because I'm in the margins, right? And we ourselves are marginalized as a human nature, as a human existence, in the terms of heaven and earth. And Jesus came to us. He came to the great macro margin for us as well. So we should know what the story is on that. That's good.
Me? Yeah. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed sitting down with Monica Guzman.
Yeah.
That entire conversation was encouraging. And also, I feel like it's been this thread of like curiosity and humility. Dr. Salvatierra also talked about having humility in the conversation. And then listening to Monica talk, just to ask good questions and to listen well, and her sorting, othering, siloing, like I keep chewing on that. Like I think about that a lot when I move through spaces.
The SOS.
Yeah, just the acronym, if you will.
Yeah, I had my time on the acronym with that episode, so I'm gonna let you have it.
Okay. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it, and I listened to it again yesterday, and I was like, man, I just really like this episode.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. That's good. What else is out there? What are some other aspects that we connect to as we engage? I know we had Nancy French on the show as well.
We did.
I really enjoyed Nancy. I know that I think all of us were, again, that was the one that just, it was mind-boggling and just a constant say what, but just what kept coming back to me is that so much of her experience, which if you haven't heard the episode, go back and listen to it. She talks about how when she changed some of her positions, how she was treated by not just politics, but by the church and the believers. It's heartbreaking because in the midst of all of this in the public square, the church has become not a place of compassion or grace or love for people that have a different position. We find the church to be a place that oftentimes is more associated lately with those that are on the attack rather than those that are waiting to embrace. And just hearing her story, it was heartbreaking. But to me, it's also just eye-opening of what are we doing right now to change that? And I think part of that is what we're trying to do in this conversation. We're trying to have a conversation so that people can learn, how do we embrace others that think differently and listen to them? Like Monica was talking about, how do we have a great conversation with them to maybe learn something in the midst of that, and be open to hear what they have to say?
Yeah, everything you're saying, I feel like there was like this in her story, Nancy French, and I know you mentioned Monica as well, but I feel like there's this kind of one of the sort of like major concepts, if you will, throughout the series that kind of pop up. I think lament was a piece. I think most of our guests, to some extent, had this sort of lament about, I want to say it like this, about the branding of the church, right? Because I think when we say the church, right, like that's all of us, right, in this room. So, of course, we would say there's a section of the church that's doing everything right, that kind of thing. And that's where, again, curiosity and listening to people is really helpful, humility and recognizing that you yourself, what you say about yourself, somebody's saying about you on the other side, right? So, but this lament to where the church has been positioned in the conversation, in the public square, particularly in America, has been consistently frustrating to those who have come on the show. Would you agree, Antoine? And
I think we, the collective voice in all of the conversations, kind of quietly in some spaces, but louder in others, is that we wish that the Christian witness was stronger and more accurate to who Christ is. And something about the political conversation and the church's role in it right now is damaging that witness at the end of the day. And we just keep kind of hitting it from multiple angles, and a lot of our guests were doing that. And Nancy's stories really put a fine point on that, as she recalls the ways not only did that affect the collective witness, but her life and her livelihood and and her family, and even in that episode, some way she wants to interface with the church. Like you even heard in her story that it shook her up a little bit with where she fits in with the church. And so I think if our chief goal is to get people to find God know the story that Jesus loves them and invite them into the kingdom and family of God to participate in his mission to redeem and restore the world, if that's the main goal, then what we're learning throughout this series is there's a lot of people who feel like we're not meeting that goal with the way we're dealing with politics.
Yeah. And you know, Nancy's story is really interesting to me because it makes me think about what Alexia said when she talks about the stewardship of democracy. So in the midst of that stewardship of democracy, many would say, particularly in a democracy like in America, the first sort of the just start moment, if you will, for the stewardship of the democracy is voting, right? And that's voting all the way around, right? Many times people think about voting just in the presidential election, and so we're going to voting, but that there's a stewardship to democracy that you should vote, right? So everybody who's listening to this or watching this in YouTube, everybody in here, if you steward this well, that you will go and vote. And you will vote for someone, right? And the reason you will vote for them is going to be deeply personal to you, right? It's going to be a story that if we brought every person we know and just put them on that couch and said, tell me your story, and if they were brave enough to say who they're voting for, they'd probably have a story that goes along with that. And of all the guests, right, we had Nancy come in, and she was the most narrative of all the guests. It was a story she was telling about her movement, if you will, inside of conservatism and as a church member inside of republicanism and conservatism. And she articulated her vote, right? Which, you know, people will be like, color commentators talking about who should vote for it. No, what we're recognizing is that unless you're not stewarding democracy, which we're trying to encourage you to do with a series called Christianity in the Public Square, if you're not stewarding it, then you're going to be voting. And if somebody followed you around and they saw who you vote for, you'd have to explain that. And so what was great is really seeing someone brave enough to tell their story. And I'd be interested to see how people will react to that, right? Because again, everybody's got to vote. And everybody has a story. And so some people will be mad that you heard a story and somebody told you how they would vote because of their story. But that's you too. Like, that's me. I've got a story. I got to vote. Yeah. We're not here to tell people how to vote, but to hear somebody's story and then go, because of this story, this is how I'm going to vote. That was a powerful thing.
Yeah. And it's something we wrestle with. I mean, like personally, I'm on staff at a church. And so when I'm in these conversations, I'm navigating, as a representative of that church, I'm navigating. I don't want to come across as pushing anyone this way or that way. And so I'm kind of measuring my thoughts. And I just remember I was thinking about after the Nancy show, saying, man, one, culture is winning over kingdom when that happens. When
what happens?
When I'm afraid that because culture is going to be upset. Right, the cultural response to, like in our episode, let's just shoot it straight. You're like, man, if she said, hey, I don't want to vote for Trump, and I don't think anyone should. Yeah, we're thinking, oh no, we don't want people to think. I'm thinking, I don't want anyone to think that we are pro or against Trump. We want to stand in the middle. Therefore, I'm going to be really careful. Maybe we should reshape or put something around this conversation or what have you. And it just got me to thinking, like, man, but the truth is what you said, like, we are all voters. We all have a story. And if there is a place where we should be able to discuss our story, our vote, and have a conversation around that, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, right? The church is a place where that ought to be able to happen without the social consequences of. And if I can't come to the church and say, hey, man, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, here are the reasons why, let's talk about it, right? If I can't do that here, then where should I be able to do that, right? In a Christian podcast that's designed to help people tell stories about where they are, what they currently believe, and for us to walk together on a journey to figure out what it means to be a Christian in the midst of all of that. Right? And so her story was particularly interesting because it felt like, oh no, there's something about us as an organization. We don't want to be politically pushing one person left or right. There's my personal life and there's my job, and saying, hey, I don't want to, as a representative of the church that I lead at, I don't want to be a voice that's pushed people left and right. And yet I do want to be a voice that says, hey, wherever you are in the political journey, let's have a conversation about it. However urgent you are about it, I do want that. I want us to come together and be a part of that. And I want to be able to live into that messiness. Nancy kind of pushed me to really think about that in a way and really think about that and really decide that it is worth the conversation. We can abide strong, urgent, passionate positions in our conversation and work together to talk it through and figure out, what's next and be on a journey. And so I really appreciate it, Nancy, for just pushing me in that way as a pastor and as a part of this podcast.
And that's a place that we all are connecting. I think that was another connective tissue of the podcast across the board, and not in every episode, but like you said, kind of quietly, is that there's this way in which, and you mentioned this a little bit, Pepper, is the way we do approach people who have a different thought process than we do, right? It's such an important thing that I think, again, everybody needs to be thinking through and need to be working toward. It's really about, again, the synergizing around this idea of curiosity, which I know when Collin was here, I know him very personally, and so that's one of his big core values is curiosity. Now, it leads you down roads you may be scared to go down, but it also leads you to relationships you never knew you had or never knew you could have. You know what I mean? So those are really powerful things. Any other major concepts that dropped in?
Well, I think that's really interesting. I thought about it. I thought about curiosity again as we're talking to Monica, and you just brought it up again. Just the fact, and I could be wrong, my experience in the church is that curiosity has always been a bad thing. In whatever regards it is, in whatever, just anything. If you ask questions, I remember having a student, my husband's in youth ministry. I remember talking to a student when she was a student. She came to our house a couple months ago as an adult, and she said, I just felt like I could never ask questions. And the questions that I did ask, nobody wanted to answer, or nobody could answer, or they would say, don't worry about it, just follow Jesus. Well, that wasn't enough. And so I think this has been really great for people to be able to ask questions. I think that's kind of what's great about Threaded too, is we give them the opportunity in this space to ask questions, to figure out their curiosity and what God is saying. And it brings it back to Dr. Salvatierra. I remember Marcus, you asked her, how do you know you are right in this conversation? And she goes, you don't. And it was yes,
for the
obviously.
Listeners, she just blew her.
Oh yeah, that's what that sound was. You don't know
her positive hiss.
That you are right. You don't know that you're right in this conversation, and so that's where humility comes in. And she also said, being right all the time is a colonial thing, is a white people thing, is a
the need to be right.
The need to be right and the need to be right about and that, with my Bible college background at a white school, was like, oh my gosh, all these things unlocked. You're absolutely right. That's what I feel right now. Is I'm like, I don't know anything anymore. You'd asked me 10 years ago, I knew exactly how to answer all the questions. I know nothing anymore, and that's okay. I'm going to be humble in that in my conversation. I'm going to be curious in that in my conversation. The end.
It's good.
That is good, man. I mean, the thing in there that she also articulated in the midst of this not knowing is that change occurs through dialogue. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not monologue, right? It's not isolationologue, if that's not a real thing, but I'm gonna make it one. It's gonna be in the dictionary later. It's about dialogue, and dialogue is difficult work. And it requires a curiosity. You have to come in with the idea that I may not have the full understanding, right? As we talked about in our acronym, right? WAGE, what if I'm wrong? Mm-hmm.
Right.
You ask questions more than you make declarative statements. You get a different perspective, even before even coming in there strategically, maybe there's a different perspective before I have this conversation. But I think this is one of the key pieces of the E, is that you envision the best. Right? So many times we demonize the other side in such a way that, and you've said it really well all the time, Antoine, it's like people don't negotiate with demons, right? They don't negotiate and they don't dialogue with demons. But most of us, if not all of us, and this is what Monica said, I think she corrected me when I said it before, she's like, all of us are trying to do the right thing, right? We all think we're doing the right thing. Everything that we see us moving toward, we believe we're being the heroes in our stories. So the curiosity is, tell me what your hero story seems to entail. What have you been put on this earth to engage with? You know what I'm saying, Chino?
Do.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. You want thoughts? Okay. So one of the things I think we heard in the Nancy French story is how she got to the point where she got, which reminded me of what Monica was talking about as you try to have the dialogue and the conversation of, instead of asking somebody why they believe what they believe, asking them how they got to those beliefs and to tell that story. And so I feel like when we had the Nancy French episode, it gave us a chance to hear her story, to hear the how she got there. And then in both of those, with Monica and Nancy, going along the lines of the dialogue, discussing differences can deepen relationships. And I feel like that's opposite of what we normally do. We're normally like, don't discuss politics, don't discuss religion, because if we discuss those things, we can't get along.
Can't do the disagreement for sure.
Right. And I loved Monica's thing where she talked about like heat or friction in a relationship isn't always bad. Like, is it cooking something or is it burning something? I thought was a great visualization of that. And I loved hearing about how like Monica's relationship with her parents were closer, even though they have very opposing political beliefs. And then the story Nancy shared at the end, where she has a very good friend and they're on opposite sides. So for me, that was very hopeful. Like this can, like, discussing differences can deepen and strengthen the relationship if you, depending on how you go about it.
Yeah, it kind of kills the boogeyman. You know, the fear is like, oh, if I say this, then. But if you just get it out there, it may not be as scary as you think. And that's what they've realized, is that I can hold a position and still not lose the relationship. Like it can happen. You know, it's not a inevitable conclusion that by stating my position that I am now alienating myself from everyone who disagrees with me, which is the fear that we run into.
I'm curious for you guys too. Like, I want to take what you said, Chino. What's really what Monica said. This differentiation to what do you mean by that? To how did you come to that?
Yeah.
Where do you think how do you think people feel about making that change? Right. Like, what's the hesitation potentially for making that change in that to move to the how you came to that, as opposed to the what did you mean by that? How do you see that working out?
I think some people are scared because they would be scared if somebody asked that question of them.
Oh,
like,
okay.
You know, like, I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes people don't want to have a conversation, is because if you ask me why I believe what I believe, some people don't really feel equipped to answer that question.
Oh,
they know that they believe something, and they don't really know why. They just know that they've been told they believe it. And if you never have conversations with others, like, that's one of the beauties of conversation, is it helps you to really understand what you really believe and why you believe it. And sometimes you find out there are things that you thought you believed that when you get to the root of it, you're like, you know what, maybe I don't, maybe it's different. Maybe it's a chance for me to learn and grow in myself. But yeah, I do think that asking people that, like, it could be freeing for some. I think it can also be scary for other people.
Is it the idea of if I ask you how you came to that, you may ask me the same question?
Exactly. Yeah. Answer, but don't ask me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want you to reciprocate on that. You know? Exactly. Yeah.
I also think that why do you think that? I think that's very accusatory and very like, you're not listening to me. You don't actually care. You're
waiting.
You are building your argument against what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think in conversation, like, despite the fact that people come in, well, there's some people that come in and they just need to be right. It's a moral conversation. They've got this, you know, they don't want to hear what your thought is. They just need you to agree, because to them it's right, wrong, black, white. That's it. And you're either in or you're out, right? And some people are just coming into that conversation, and to them it's combative in that sense, because they're like, we got to kill the bad to protect the good, and either you're something that your ideas are something that either I got to kill or I want to rescue you out of. But what we don't realize is that before we could even get to persuasion, we have to validate dignity, and it's the question of, hey, how did you get there, that opens up a mind map for how someone arrived to something, or a story or a life story that you can simply say, wow, like you've said, we've said it here a couple times, it's been said in some of the other episodes, I can see how you got there. And just saying that validates that I'm a rational person, that I'm a reasonable person, that I am a a good natured person.
I noticed you didn't put another R there.
I didn't.
Yeah, I was waiting
I ran
for it
out.
past
I
it.
ran out.
That's all right. I
Rational,
like to watch it.
Relational. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it drops the dignity dukes, if you will.
Oh,
The
there you go.
Dignity
that's a
Dukes,
new one.
that's a
I
good
hadn't
one.
actually heard the Dignity Dukes.
That's a cool shirt. That'd be a good band name. Dignity Dukes.
The Dignity
You got to say it
Dukes.
right. You can't just.
You can't say dutes.
Dutes.
That ain't it.
It's amazing.
But it drops the thing down because the political conversation is fighting because people are fighting for their sense of I'm a good person,
Right.
up against someone else's sense of. But if you get to validate that, I think we are both good people, which can come on the backside of that's reasonable, that makes sense. I can see how you got there. All those types of statements. Those statements drop the dukes, and then that person might reciprocate the question in a good way.
Okay.
Oh wow, so you've heard me.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so where are you on that? And now with Dukes down, with Dignity Dukes down,
I hear. Yeah, I was there.
right? With Dukes down, I'm no longer in this conversation to protect myself. I am actually in this conversation for the content.
Yeah.
We actually get to discuss the actual content together now because I am not at stake in this conversation anymore. I know that I've been valued and respected in this conversation. So much of marital conflict, most relational conflicts, these dynamics are at play. And the sooner we learn how to navigate these things, big arguments can be less. And the pathway to solutions could actually be shortened. But we don't often.
No.
Most of the time, it's I'm arguing my dignity under the guise of my idea.
Sure. Well, and I think it makes me think about the movie Inside Out too. Yes, I'm bringing it in. I love the movie.
You loved it.
I did, and part of it I think is
we
so
haven't
important.
talked about this.
We
I
haven't
didn't
talked-
realize that you loved it.
I loved it because of what you just said or what you were talking about. What I think was really powerful in that is this girl had been creating an idea of herself that was singular. I'm a good person, but spoiler alert, right?
No.
Like it is that there's more to life and more to engagement than just I'm a good person, but that there's all these other things that you can identify as, and just because somebody says that you are this way and it goes against your idea of I'm a good person, there's also a part of you that doesn't do the things right.
Yeah.
That makes mistakes. And that's okay too. That's part of humanity and life. But in a triumphal society, where you're not allowed to lose, or we think we always win, or you spin everything to a win, then in an argument you think the only thing that's going to be successful is if I win this argument, not if I engage this argument and learn more. Right? I had to make some adjustments because Chino was going
got
crazy.
really worried.
Got
You were
really
really
crazy. Because have you not seen it yet? Is yes?
Not yet.
Oh, my
It
word.
has
Did
to
we-
come on streaming.
Oh,
and
my
then I
words.
can
Oh,
watch it.
Okay, so what we're gonna do after
One
this
day
is we're all
we're
heading
going
to the movie theater.
We're going to take yes.
Yes,
Just, it sounds like you
It's
just
got
don't want to
a
pay
field
for it.
trip, is what I heard.
Do you
Yeah.
not like the movie theater, or is it just that you don't want to pay?
It's
the
not
money?
my favorite place if I'm to spend money to.
It's
It's
just the money.
expensive. When you get to
It's
two kids?
expensive.
Well, I'm saying,
I
is it
agree.
the money or is it the experience?
Must be the money.
I mean,
Nobody?
I think if I'm going to do like a family experience, I would rather be interacting than sitting in front of
Ah.
a screen.
This is the first date
so-
argument.
That's funny, but this.
This
okay,
is a
no.
family argument. Yes.
It's a
No,
family
no,
argument, but it's also the
It's
first.
also first date
It's also the
argument.
first
Yeah.
date argument.
Should we
So-
just sit looking at a screen, or should we be able to talk to each other through the movie? Which I absolutely cannot stand when people are talking to me through the movie. Sorry, that was my trigger.
Sorry, we
Good
we
Lord.
completely interrupted you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you were
it's
doing
okay.
This
great.
we have gotten
Great.
severely off topic here.
No, this is right in the middle of
All right.
it. It was a good transition.
Okay.
But you want more family engagement, so you don't want to go see Inside
Right.
Out in
Or
the
if
theater.
I'm-
You want to.
Going out with friends too, I'm like, I want engagement because most of the time, it's not very often when you have like other friends that are moms and you're trying to get together
Sure.
that it happens frequently. So I'm like, do I want to just sit next to you for 2 hours and not say anything, or actually like build relationship?
Well, but
wait,
see,
wait. How did you come to that? That idea?
About the movie theater?
Oh, we're about to do it right now.
We're having. I'm trying to model something here, people.
How did you arrive?
How did you arrive?
I understand.
Nobody was following me on this thing? I was.
No,
Thank you very much.
I tracked with him it took me a second though.
How did you come to this thought process, Chino?
Why do you think that way, Gino?
Nope, that's
Right.
not the. No, how did she
It's combative. It's combative, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
why do
Don't
you
say
think
that.
that?
Don't
What do you
say,
mean?
Why do you think
Yeah.
that way?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you come to that?
I think it just developed over time with a shorter, because in high school I went to see movies all the time,
Okay.
but you always get to hang out with your friends in high school. It's not a big deal.
Okay.
But I think as I got older and time, there's like work and kids and things, and it's like, okay, I only have a limited amount of time to like do something that I enjoy.
Yeah.
Is this at the top of the list? And with the amount of money, because maybe if tickets were like $3 a ticket, I would be like, okay, I don't care. But
I don't care about spending time with my friends.
That's when it was. That's when we was younger. $3.75. I remember seeing "Lean on Me" for $3.75.
Oh my word.
But if it's like, okay, we can go to the theater or we can go have dinner and then go do this thing, or we can go do this thing for the same price.
Like a baseball game.
Probably not a baseball game, but
You're messing
FC
this
Dallas
whole thing up.
tickets.
Okay.
Yes.
How did you come to the fact that you'd want to watch FC Dallas over the Rangers?
Oh my goodness.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Look, I'm just kidding. I just wanted some up. Like I
You have to finish. The finish is that makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
The finish is.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
The
Is like,
finish is it makes sense. I can see why.
Yeah.
You would rather interface with people for 2 hours because you don't have a whole bunch of time.
Yes.
And that makes sense. And then there's no but behind it. You have to stop.
and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I disagreed with your assessment of a movie, and when you articulate, I was like, oh, well, I can see how that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And it makes me kind of go, that might be a good idea for me to think about as well, because I also have limited time. Do I want to spend my time looking at a movie if I don't get to spend time with my friends? Now, you'll know, Antoine and I, we go to movies by ourselves, not together, but like individually. that is our time. We're like, all right, I'm going to movies.
Yeah,
like, nobody messes with me. Yeah,
but I would say this.
That's cool.
The both and for me in that scenario is I like to watch the movie and I like to discuss the movie.
Yeah, afterward.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the 2 hour, like a movie like Inside Out is perfect for it because you'd watch it and then again it takes more time, but the ride home or the ride or going, if you're with a group of friends, you go somewhere and to discuss it.
Sure.
I like to break things down.
Yeah.
So
You just may not have as much time as Chino does.
I don't have
Because this is exciting.
other people don't like to break things down. They just want to watch it and go. And so for me, I like to watch it and then be like, whether it's how the movie was made or whatever. So I kind of like so for me, it is a little bit of both and if I have the right audience.
That's what I think is really good about that convo. I know it seems silly. It's in the midst of this conversation, this deep conversation about politicals and all these kind of things. But it's a simple understanding of, even in the simplest things, about movies that can engage and have people disagreement. When you just ask the question, I already learned in that. Imagine what would happen in a political conversation or a race conversation if we went to that, and what it might open up. Immediately, what looks like a crazy thing to do for me goes, oh, that's actually a really good idea. So I love, again, I know we've got other stuff, and I've got another piece that I want to engage a bit just here, but I think that was fun to just kind of engage that. Sorry, Schmevin, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's exciting, but I'm trying to think through, like, there's one more big thing that I took away in the midst of everything we learned that doesn't have to do with Inside Out too. Yeah, but
are you anxious over there though?
No, I was just thinking like
exciting.
I think some of our listeners are probably sitting out there saying, okay, so we come to the end of a series like this. What am I supposed to do in the midst of this election season now? Like, I've heard a lot. I've had some good conversations. And I know we're not going to endorse and say you should vote this way or that way or for this person or that person. But one of the things that I also took away was from Stephen Reeves, listening to him talk about Christian advocacy and being a lobbyist,
Mm-hmm.
for that. The idea of not always using your vote for you, but using your vote for others, because for a person from a position of privilege to sometimes think, I don't always have to vote for what's going to benefit me the most, but vote for what's going to make the biggest impact to those that need the most help. I think like that's one of the things that really meant a lot to me in the midst of all this.
Yeah.
That was something that blew my mind because I had never thought about voting. Yeah, thank you, Jeanette.
Sound effects now. Good.
Yes.
It's good. Thank you, Pepper.
As well. I'm glad you brought that up, Shmevin. Because Collin also talked about it. And when he broke it down just about how the difference with like you pay property tax, but there's people paying sales tax that don't own like the property. Like he gave a very specific example. And in that example, I was like, I had never thought about it from that perspective or just that with my vote, I can use it to advocate for others.
It seems natural. Like
I'm a
homeowner.
At the cost of yourself, not just avocation, but maybe I'm going to lose a little bit by voting that way.
Right.
Yeah. And even in that conversation, it may not even be a loss. It just may not be a gain. A gain where somebody else may gain where they usually lose. Right. Because again, he was talking about, I think, a tax benefit or a break for homeowners. Right. It's like, well, I was already paying what I was paying. You know what I mean? So give me a tax break. I gain. But there are others who just don't even get to benefit from that type of legislation at all, who need it. And I think it's a good question. And I'd be curious, like, I think it's a good question that you offer, Shmevin, right? Like, what do we do with all of this? And I know, Antoine, you said this early on in the series. It's like, this series isn't necessarily about hey, here's what you're supposed to do. It's about, here are some things that are in the public square that Christians can engage and play and participate in. We have been talking about some practical things as far as conversation is concerned. We have heard stories about how people have given their lives to things like advocacy and lobbying. And you hear maybe a Collin Packer story who's like, I'm in an internship where I'm learning how to, where I'm writing a paper and trying to help churches make this connection. You have a Daryl Bock who's going around and trying to help people create this taxonomy that's there. Even the conversation we had around Christian nationalism, right? Like this thing is a big piece as well. That's helping people to see where that disconnects from the idea of Christianity with a Christendom mentality. Some of that is really just helping us to hear differently. And much like we say with color commentary, it's putting on these lenses to be able to go, before I was just looking at things at a certain way, but now when I put these lenses on, I can see different things. And I don't think that's easy for everybody. You know what I mean? I think we wrestle with that and we struggle with that. I don't know where everybody else is on this, but there are things that trigger me in the midst of this conversation that make me have to kind of step back and be convicted of things I've said historically, things I've said in conversations, the ways I've thought about people, demonized people. It's a conviction. So I don't know if anybody else has a way in which they've been kind of feeling as we're getting to the end of this series that you feel a change or a conviction yourself that the audience needs to hear. But
I just recognize how high a bar Christ set for us and how pervasive his way of living is to all of life, and how I cheapen that sometimes. Like how it's said a lot of times in sermons, but it's easy to compartmentalize who Christ is and how Christ asks us to think and to see the world and people, to the church environment, to the small group experience or the preaching or something like that. And sometimes it feels like the politics and the social space, we don't let Jesus's reach get all the way over there to change the way we think there, which is an example of advocating for someone else instead of our own interests.
Right.
That's a very Jesus thing.
That's a Jesus thing, right?
That's not an American thing.
Too,
Capitalism is built on self-interest.
Yeah.
So our culture tells us the best way we run, the best way we do economy is to serve yourself.
Right.
And so we're inundated with that. That's going to be our default way of thinking in this culture. To allow the way of Jesus to really reach every aspect of my life, including that, is just a challenge. And there's so many places in my life where my hands are off the wheel, and so those cultural instincts, my personal sin instincts, they just take over without Christ coming in and me applying some sort of, I'm going to use discipleship intentionality around those things. You say, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the public square. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus with my vote, and with the way I see people, right? And that's a bigger, more different question that is even bigger than the term Christian. It's how do I be like Jesus in this space? And it turns out that his way is just so different than my instincts, and I keep learning that.
It's good. Yeah. Ladies, anything?
I saw you writing over there.
I was writing again. It always gives me away. No, just along the lines of stewarding democracy. And I think the convicting part for me was like, yes, I go and vote on the major elections, but on like local elections, do I really know what's happening?
Sure.
Not necessarily. And then just the time to be well informed, right? Like it's a little sacrifice, but it is a thing, like that it's going to take some time and energy to be informed so I can steward this well. And just kind of, I don't know what you were talking about, Antoine, just thinking like about Jesus overflowing into all the parts of our life and not just certain sections, and just that realization of, even though I think I engage it in some ways, like this is kind of a part where I haven't really thought about applying my faith or seeing how my faith applies. So
that's good.
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up in conservative white Christian evangelical, went to an evangelical school, non-denomination. And so I grew up, right. Yeah. Well, you grew up thinking that you're right and whatever. And so I've swung this pendulum to the other side of believing, maybe not really, but like visual.
Yeah.
And so I'm really great. Yeah. I'm really great at demonizing and just disassociating. Just naturally, it's a survival tactic I've learned. And so to check myself to go, man, like that's not okay. That's not okay for me to do. That's not okay for me to do to people that I love. And we went to the Holocaust Museum in Dallas a little while ago, and they have this portion that is all about what starts a genocide. And one of those things is dehumanizing. And I think another one is like othering, which brings back that Monica SOS thing.
Right.
So just to recognize that in myself and check it every time it comes up, because it comes up a lot. It's really easy for me to do.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Shmevin, any learnings over there that you're bringing back, any convictions or?
No, I mean, I think in the end for me, it's just a conviction, like I said, that I have a gift. Like we live in a democracy, not because it's God's chosen plan that democracy exists. I mean, we talked about that in nationalism, like this isn't a Christian country. God didn't design the world to be what we are. There are different things out there, but whatever you live in, God gives you privileges and opportunities and access, and you can either use it to better yourselves or you can use it to advance his name and his kingdom. And advancing his name and his kingdom often looks like fighting for the needs of others and looking for their best interests and not always for your own best interest. And so, it's just so hard in the midst of politics. And it's hard, like you talk about, you were talking about Chino doing the work of research. It's hard to do research because it's hard to find good research. It's hard to know who to listen to. And so it's gotten even harder these days to be well-informed going into voting, to know where to go. And so, just so much, I think, praying about it, getting good counsel, having good conversations, having people around you that challenge your thoughts, it helps you to be ready to go in and truly, hopefully, act in a way that would honor God.
It's good. I think one of the things that I really in this time and in this series have continually wrestled with, right? And we've talked about it a little bit already, but there is a story that is my story in this public square, in this voting, if you will, and participating in communal engagement. There is a story that's mine. And I think, again, you mentioned it earlier, Antoine, like there's this fear sometimes to tell people your story and why you are doing the things you're doing, right? Because we don't assume that people are going to ask us, well, how did you come to that?
Right.
And so we come with a very defensiveness or a kind of demureness where we're like, I'm going to tell you a little bit, but I'm not going to give you everything because it's going to turn into something and it's not going to turn into a good conversation, right? But I think, again, it's watching, and again, it's in some ways it's why she wrote her book, watching Nancy French be like, look, this is the way I'm doing things, right? And being confident when she goes on show, she's like, this is how it's working and this is what I think about that, right? And so I know, obviously, we have this kind of brand at Color Commentary where we're allowing people to have tell their stories, and again, we're not pushing people either way. But in my own personal life, where I'm talking to people, I'm talking to those in my neighborhood and whatnot. It's like, hey, this is why I'm voting. Here's who I'm voting for and why. But it's not in a sense of saying, and you're wrong because you don't vote this way. It's just in a place to be able to be confident in the work that I have done in thinking about this, in the research and being informed in the topics well, the time that I've spent in that and praying and thinking about it even in my own way in which I believe God is asking me to participate in the mission that he is on, and with my own gifts and skills, that to be able to say, this is why I'm voting this way, I think is a helpful piece, with the caveat of understanding that my vote does not solve the problem, because the parties and the political environment does not solve the problem. We already have a savior in Jesus. Jesus has opened up the pathway for the problem, if you will, to be solved. We're ambassadors. We are left here to try to help people see the world through this lens, connect with this Jesus that has created a place for us that is going to exist that doesn't have these problems. And we're supposed to be a little bit of a taste of what that is. We're supposed to engage in the world like Jesus would, model who he is. We're supposed to be messengers of who Christ is. And then as a church collective, we are supposed to model and be messengers as well. And so for me, I continue to lament where we are as the church in this political conversation, but I get great confidence and wanting to tell and be confident enough and justified enough, if I will, to tell my story of how Christ is leading me to engage in these political conversations as we go forward.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I was in a conversation this week, and I'm like, man, we all should have the right to our story, right? Wherever it leads us, we have the right to tell that story, to be a part of it. The Bible's full of them.
Yeah.
It's story after story after story. We have the right to it. And there's something that is contributive to the overall good of society when we share our stories.
Yes.
Right. Instead of hiding them. Right.
Yeah.
There's something good about that. And we've arrived to a place where we're afraid to share our stories in certain ways. And
what did Collin say? He said that the success of the church is based on the lack of communication.
That's right. The less you say, the better.
That's right. That's the unity of the church. Yeah.
Right. There's something. If Jesus has taught us anything, well, no, I shouldn't say that. But one of the big things he's taught us, and the scripture teaches that we don't live from this place of fear anymore. We shouldn't.
Yeah.
And yet that fear continues to grapple us because we're in a culture that's fear-induced, that's full of fear, that it incites and cultivates fear in us. And it infiltrates into the church. That's why I was saying earlier about culture versus kingdom. Mm-hmm. The culture of fear wins over the kingdom of freedom, right? Spiritual freedom, right? We allow those elements into the kingdom space, the kingdom of God space, where it should not be there, and suddenly the people in the kingdom are afraid.
Yeah,
and we shouldn't be. We should be able to live alone. Jesus wasn't faded by Zacchaeus and his story. He wasn't faded by the woman caught in adultery, or by Peter's life, by Judas, like Matthew. He wasn't faded by that. These people's lives and their stories came. And as a part of that, we know those stories and they're beneficial to us, right? It's added, not subtract. So our ability to exemplify that as the church says something to the world about who Jesus is. And our inability to do that also says something about who Jesus is. And one of those messages is right.
That's the story. That's the vision in many ways of Threaded. the desire that we have is that when people on the outside would look at the church, they would see us in all of our diversity, whether that be racial or ethnic or cultural, denominational, political diversity. And they would see us so united, right? So collaborative, so loving to one another, even in the midst of our diversiveness, that they would be inspired to say, who is the God who threaded those people together?
You said united, and there's a part of me that would say inseparable. Like
one
instead of united.
Yeah.
Like, because united, we're united, but it may be that we have these different thoughts. But those thoughts don't separate us. They don't
it's a
divide us.
oneness.
It's a persistent connectiveness that people like. I can be safe there because my place is never at stake.
Yes.
In that place,
Right.
Regardless of what my life or my choices or my thoughts, my place is settled, and it's that indivisiveness that the community of God is promising us that I hope one day to be a bigger piece of for the world to see.
And you hope, like Jesus did in his final prayer, where he said he wanted us to be one like he and the Father are one. Because when we are one, then people will know that Jesus is from heaven and that God loves them. So this is beyond just a diverse place. It's beyond just unity. It's a oneness, a connectedness that is close, like your hands and your feet are connected, right? Like they just go through, there's a sinew that goes and engages that. And that's what we want you to be as you're going out there, that you would be these folks that become the sinew in the body of Christ that connect maybe those parts that don't usually get along, that don't work together, that this show would inspire you and equip you to know even how to do that, particularly as we engage outside of the walls of the church into the public. And how they see us, right? It's an important piece for them because as we go out there, they learn more about who Christ is by engaging with Christ's people, right? And so our job is to emulate Christ in such a way that we woo people to the same church that Christ was wooing them to as well. And so that's why we do what we do. Being able to find these times with colorful conversations where people can look through these different lenses of people who love Jesus and learn even more about who they are in the eyes of Christ as they look through the lens of others. So I love it. I've been excited about this. I'm grateful for all the work that everybody's put into this. Shout out to Shmevin with all the wonderful engineering and editing that you've done and putting these things together. Shout out to Janelle getting all the pieces. Pepper, excuse me. I got into a mode here. Getting the guests together, working with all of our crazy schedules, trying to find a time for all of us to get in and providing snacks. If you hadn't seen, I've been having this candy, which gets us through here. Right? So we always have candy.
Make sure we together.
Is that the sponsor for today?
That is not the sponsor for today. For sure. Yes, Mike and
Candy.
Mega Mix Sour. Yes, if they call us, we will let them pay us for that endorsement right there. So thank you so much for that, Pepper. It's been a lot of stuff that you've been working on for months. And so here we are. We've been doing it. And Chino, as you as well, I know once these things are created and edited, they go out into the social space and all the social medias and the cuts and the music and the stories, and it's crazy and wonderful, and it's such a great thing to have so many people working on this project and getting it out there, not just for now, but also for later. And we hope that is something that you'll experience as well. And of course, we couldn't do it without Antoine Malone in the space here, bringing all the wisdoms and the wonderfulnesses into the conversation, keeping me in check, keeping the audience in check, keeping the Theo bros in check, keeping all the folks in check, listening and making sure that we're moving in the right direction. I love doing the show with you. So excited we got to do this, bringing some of our conversations on the porch, if you will, into the couch and let other people hear it. That's what we're here to do, give you a peek into some of these conversations, and we hope that this has been helpful for you. This has been Colored Commentary, Christianity in the Public Square. Oh, quick shout out. I forgot. Shout out to Keith Heilman as well. Many of you, if you've been walking alongside with us, you know that there's devotionals that are put together, prayer guides that go along with that. Keith is the mastermind behind so much of that, and we're grateful that he's taken that on and being able to give you a way to kind of think through these things even theologically as you go forward. So it's a big exciting thing as my phone goes off. That's probably Keith going, hey, where are you guys at? No,
that's right.
Hey, we love you guys. Thanks for being here. Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race, where we come together and we help you see through the different lenses so that you know how to go out into your world. And what do we help them do, people?
Stay
colored.